Rebecca Harold, the privacy professor, joining us in studio right now to talk about some things you need to pay attention to. And we've been talking about this first one for quite a long time.
Yes, we have. And you know, it's funny because 2 years ago we were talking about how the Russians were actually trying to break into multiple systems, election systems, to the Democrats, to the Republicans, and so on. Well, in the past week, what have you heard? You've heard a lot of, oh, we're just finding out about the Russian hacking. Well, no, we aren't. We're finding out more things. But I had one of your viewers send me a message, and they said, well, wait a minute. We have some of our politicians saying that you can't have any evidence that people are hacking unless you catch them in the act. And that's wrong. In fact, they were confused because they were saying the same politicians that said you can't prove anything unless you catch them are now the ones saying, aha, here we go. Well, the latter is the correct thing. And I thought I'd let your viewers know some of the things that gets recorded, the digital tracks that are created when all of these hackers...
The footprints.
The footprints, or we call it the digital exhaust. I kind of like that too, because there's so many little things that are left behind out there whenever someone's, trying to get into other people's systems.
Really?
So, yeah, so like where you're located, if you're on a certain type of system, when you're trying to get onto the internet, why oftentimes there's little digital exhaust elements that will show the type of device you're on, the operating system you're on, the location you're coming from, the types of files that you're using, the types of code that you're using if you're executing code, the date and time, also oftentimes the language, because a lot of times the different code is written for different folks who speak different languages.
Where's all this stored? If
Yes.
there's so much information that's being captured, it's got to be somewhere.
Well, you're right. And it's stored in millions of locations, because when you actually go onto the internet, and it seems so fast, right? When you go to a website, you get data back right away. Well, that data has a path that goes through potentially hundreds or thousands or more of servers. So as that data is passing through all those different servers, it's leaving little trails. Not only is it leaving little trails, but it's picking up data along the way to show the path that it took to get to its destination. So that's something else to think about when people are saying, well, how can we tell who's doing this hacking? Well, there's an entire segment of the cybersecurity field that focuses on digital forensics, and it's fascinating. I have some business partners who do that, and basically that's all they do. They go in and they kind of peel back the layers of the digital onion, if you will, that is the internet, and they look at all of the different digital trails that's left behind, and then looking at all those different things, you could start putting together a picture, including if the person who's doing the hacking might have been trying to hide who they were.
There's no way to clean any of that up or to say, or make it look like somebody else did it, like you're pointing them in a different direction.
There are ways and tools that you can use, but just think about it. If you were going to rob a bank and you put on a costume to hide your identity, and you went into that bank and you walked through the mud before you got into the bank, you might leave behind your tennis shoe footprint, right? So that tennis shoe footprint might be able to be linked to you even if your identity couldn't be seen. So it's the digital equivalent of that, only there are many more types of digital evidence pieces that are out there. And that's why we knew 2 years ago when we started talking about, if you remember, Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear.
Right,
and
the bears, yeah.
The bears and APT 28, those are all Russia hackers.
Is there any way of breaking it down in a somewhat simple way? I know
Yes.
it's very complicated and we could talk many, many times about this, but if people are seeing the headlines here
Yes.
recently, what is that basically saying and where do we go from here?
Well, what we need to do, because what's frustrating for those of us in information security is that there are no standards for a lot of our different federal systems, especially for elections. So right now, each state actually has their own rules or a few rules. Sometimes they aren't comprehensive.
Security rules?
Security rules.
Which you talked about this when the elections were coming up.
Yes, and really we need a federal standard that sets the minimum baseline by which voting systems must follow. Right now, in the last election, 75% of our voting systems that we used had paper copies of the votes so that you could audit to verify that even if the digital amounts were changed, you would have a paper trail to verify that they weren't changed. Now, there's zero evidence right now that the votes were changed. Let me get that clear. But there's still 25% of all the voting systems in the U.S. that do not have a paper trail that's auditable. So we need that.
A backup, yeah.
We need that as a backup. And we need to have, you know, it's our democracy. We need to have at least a baseline standard for security for our voting systems and for our political systems. Just yesterday in the news, why in Ohio, some of the government sites were hacked and different messages were put out there that looked like they came from ISIS. Even Governor Kasich's site was hacked. So, you know,
they're making it seem like it's too easy to be able to do things like that.
Well, and you know, sometimes it is. I mean, with the Parliament hack that happened on Friday, or it was announced on Friday over in the UK, a lot of that happened because they were using bad passwords.
Which is something you first talked about when you first came on the air with this. It sounds simple and it sounds ridiculous, but something as basic as a decent password could save you a lot of hassle.
And that's the problem.
Major organizations are still doing silly things like
they are
using bad passwords and things like that.
Yes, and you know, I go to a lot of organizations. I have a big pharmaceutical I'm going to here in a couple of months to talk to their executives. I found more problems at the executive level, and they're the ones that's often targeted. But oftentimes they write down their passwords, they give it to their secretaries or administrative assistants. It's like, come on, you don't want to have all your executives' passwords not only written,
posted on your computer,
on your file
like that.
Yes.
Now I know you have a tip for our viewers this morning.
Yes. Okay, so one more thing, ransomware.
Okay.
A tip for ransomware. Recently, what was probably the largest sum of ransom was just paid. You want to give a guess how much a business paid for ransom?
Business.
A business.
For ransom.
$500,000.
$1.02 million in South Korea. It was for a business that hosted around 3,400 different businesses on 157 or so Linux servers. What happened was it froze all of those servers.
Wow.
So, you know, everybody needs to know you could be a victim. So you need to make backups, and you also need to make sure that you have data ready to completely restore. If
All right, now people want to get more information about what you do. Rebecca, where can they get a hold of you?
Go to simbas360.com, and we handle all the different aspects of information security, privacy, compliance. It's fascinating, it's always changing, and we're happy to help you with our tools.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for your advice and tips this morning.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.
We will.